What if Netflix made Die Hard and Phone Booth have a baby? Let's talk about Carry On. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Guys, today we're going to talk about Carry On. But before we get into the main discussion, you already know what time it is. Movie recommendations. So, Mandem, what's the best recent thing that you've seen that you want to tell the people?
Christmas is kind of the time to be watching movies and stuff, but I have a large family, so there isn't any sort of peace and quiet to ever watch movies. But I did catch the opening episodes of season 2 for the Squid Game. For anyone that doesn't know, Squid Game was a very popular Netflix TV show from a few years back, where it's a Korean, I believe. Don't let me get that wrong. Or it's an Asian TV show, just based on these people that are invited to the set of games to win a large amount of money, and unbeknownst to them that if they lose in the game, they also lose their life as well. Just kind of follows this character, his kind of unlucky journey and whatever, and sort of how he overcomes and eventually wins the Squid Game. At the end of season 1, he was about to board a plane, decides to change his mind and go after the people that are running these Squid Games. And the opening episodes it's a few years later, and it's kind of showing him trying to find the people and sort of pouring all of these all his money that he earned into trying to find these people. And so far it's cool. What I'm looking for is, because from the advertisement, it's kind of showing him back in the games, and I'm trying to sort of kind of understand and piece together how it makes sense for him to kind of be back in the game. And so far it's making sense. He's found the guy that initially invited him. They had a very kind of tense standoff moment between the two of them as well, which is actually really cool to the ending of episode 1. And from there he has a little bit kind of more information to go off of. So all in all, it's a little bit early to sort of judge the season as a whole, which is why I'm kind of giving you mostly background on this. But it's a promising start so far to season 2, because I know the creator only wanted to make one season of it as well, and was sort of very clear in his comments that after season 2 he's really happy to not be working on this for a while as well. So we're going to see what kind of work comes out of a person that didn't want to make a season 2 of a show. So we'll see how it develops throughout the season.
The last person who was in that position was Todd Phillips, just saying.
And we got the Joker too. So far it's not that level. So far he at least cares about what he created enough to not completely butcher the characters. But we'll see how it plays out.
I finished it. I really liked it. People had an issue with it on social media. I don't know if you've been checking. They had a big issue with it, but I liked it. Yeah. So I think to be fair, I don't know. I think you might have the same opinion as other people. I'm not too sure. I think you might. But
I missed the comments. What were the issues?
Mainly just the ending. And yeah, it's the way that any people's complain about, 3 years and you give us this. And there's always going to be that argument about, they shouldn't have made a second one. They should have just left it alone. There's always going to be that type of argument. But with this one, I think they should have continued, because it's such a big of an IP that you just, I think for me, there's certain movies that you can't just leave alone. I think this is definitely something which you have to build a franchise out of it, in my opinion. But yeah, I liked the second season, but yeah, I understand the argument around it, but still I liked it. For me, it was actually going to be Squid Game, but I didn't want to do something which I knew was going to be mentioned. I had a feeling that was going to be mentioned, so I'm going to say Daylight's End instead. I watched this. I watched it yesterday, I believe, and this was a good one. It gives 30 Days of Night. Is it 30 Days of Night? Yeah, it gives that type of vibes. Even though this was in the city, it was based in the city, so pretty much there's a plague that turns everyone into vampires or just bloodthirsty creatures, but they look kind of like vampires in a way. And yeah, just a group of survivors trying to survive. There's nothing out of the ordinary. There's nothing that's different from any other film any other film just like this. I just think it's just a good film to binge on if you're in that type of mood, in terms of the whole post-apocalyptic zombie or vampire taking over your city, group of survivors trying to survive. Yeah, it's just one of those movies where you have a good time with it. Action is great. Character interactions, the whole relationship dynamics isn't the greatest, but it's good. It's definitely good enough. So yeah, man, it's definitely, I don't think there's any highlight moments. It's just a fun film. It's a fun film to binge on. So I definitely say that's something which you should add to your binge list if you're ever in that mood of, that apocalypse mood.
I'm always looking for good vampire movies, and especially ones that are actually monsters. And I've not heard of this, so I might check it out. All right, my pick this week is Screamers, which is a 1995 sci-fi horror movie. And the idea is essentially that it's a remote mining planet. There are these two factions that have been at war over resources that have the potential to save Earth. And they are locked in this years-long, if not decades-long war. And everybody is essentially so far gone from Earth that they've basically been forgotten, and they've just been killing each other for years and years, and there's no end in sight. The title refers to this weapon called the Screamers, which are essentially saw blades stuck to drones that kind of bury under the ground, and as they come for you, they make this screaming sound. The plot is kind of whatever. It basically involves the first chance in years at peace negotiations. So a group of people from one faction start to seek out people from the other faction, and then the plot kind of unfolds from there, and they kind of travel through this desolate wasteland that the world has turned into. And the plot is not really the amazing thing. It's more about this sense of bleakness and hopelessness that comes from somebody who has lived through years of war. And it might accidentally have anticipated what drone warfare is like. Like, now that that's a reality, it actually kept reminding me as I watched it about stuff that has just happened in the past year or the past 2 years. So it's kind of interesting on that front. So it's all atmosphere, it's all character, it's all vibes, and the story is also there. But overall, I really enjoyed it. And it's this kind of old school science fiction that they don't really make very much of anymore. So I enjoyed it on that level. It was a massive flop when it came out and people called it trash. And I think it's at least a good time if you like that kind of movie.
Is there monsters in this film?
The Screamers are drones. They're kind of these autonomous drones that are basically replicating themselves, and they burrow through the ground and come after you. Part of the plot is that they've started making drones that look like people. That creates this paranoia angle of who can you trust, who is a screamer, who is a person. A theme of this is that kind of war is kind of nonsense, that the person on the other side is not really your enemy, you just happen to be on the other side. This arbitrariness of who's friend and who's foe. And then there's like an actual enemy that's dangerous to everybody, who looks like you but isn't you, but is actually a dangerous weapon that just trying to kill you. So it's kind of this whole perception of reality and that sort of thing that is based on a Philip K. Dick story, who was a famous science fiction author in the 60s and 70s, who wrote a whole bunch of stuff like this, like constructed reality and perception and that sort of thing. He also wrote like Minority Report and a few others, and Blade Runner as well. Like the stories that those movies are based on. And this is one of the less well-known ones, but it's just a good watch.
I'm gonna check that out. It looks decent. All right. Well, the main event. Carry on. Let me just tell you guys quickly what it was about. It's pretty much about a young airline security guard who's blackmailed into smuggling by someone mysterious, by the way. So into smuggling a mysterious package, a dangerous package, onto the plane. Guys, what did you think?
So I actually had a pretty good time with it, considering everything. So I think there's really two big parts to this movie. One is the actual plot itself, which is one of the stupider things I've seen in a while. Like the more you pay attention to the details and try to question things, the more absurd everything gets. And some of this is like the logistics of how airports work, and some of this is like just basic physics and like people behaving like humans. Just to give one example, the guy has this earpiece in his ear and the terrorist is talking to him, and he talks out loud to have that conversation. But there's like hundreds of people around him in earshot, and he's just talking to himself, and nobody notices, even though they should, right? So I thought there were some clever scenes in this that I'm sure we'll get into, where essentially the TSA guy has to stop the terrorists, but the terrorists can see and hear everything he does, right? Because they're hacked into the surveillance, right? Like the airport, like the security cameras and stuff like that. And so a few times in the movie, he finds ways to trick them. And by knowing exactly like how the airport is laid out and what they can see and what they can't. And so there's a couple of scenes where he outsmarts them. And I had the feeling that the writer was really proud of themselves for having come up with that idea. But that is then buried in an extremely stupid plot that ignores everything about how the world works and how people work. And it's kind of, I think it comes down to like how much of our problem is that for you. And the reason I kind of ended up having a good time is because I liked the protagonist and I liked the performance of the villain, like because of the bulk of the movie is those two essentially being in dialogue with each other. And this whole cat and mouse game and how the two kind of try to manipulate each other is something I got a lot of enjoyment out of. And most of the plot holes and stuff like that don't really impact the character level too much. And for that reason, I was able to kind of brush it aside, which I normally wouldn't do for a movie. But I think this is a case where I think the good parts kind of outweigh the bad parts. And so for that reason, I kind of had a decent time with it. But then by the end, the plot takes over again because we have to stop the terrorist. And that's where it just gets aggressively stupid. And you kind of just have to say, okay, like by this point, you either care about the guy or you don't. And it kind of determines, I think, whether or not you're going to like the movie.
So saying that, I did not care about the protagonists, and therefore I didn't enjoy the movie quite as much as you did. I will say it's a good streaming movie. It's not a good movie. And what I mean by that is that because you're at home and it's on Netflix and it's just like something easy that you can put on, I guess it's fine. Like it does kind of enough things well in the movie in terms of like having an interesting premise. You know, it's kind of like similar to Pelham 1, 2, 3, where you've got like the villain in the protagonist's ears, knows everything, well, knows a lot about them and kind of like has them sort of kind of like doing their bidding essentially, and kind of has them under the gun without sort of actually having to physically put a gun at them. Apart from like the premise and the idea of it, I just didn't get behind any like of like the characters or anything like that. I quite like the villain, the actor that plays sort of the villain. He's in like a few different movies that I do like, but he just didn't kind of like work here for me. And that's maybe more because I've seen him in like comedy movies as opposed to like trying to take him seriously as a bad guy in this. I just like, this like kind of like, he's the guy from Ozark as well. But like this kind of like stern, sort of trying to be intimidating thing just didn't quite work for me when viewing him. And then like the hero guy, he was just like kind of run of the mill type character for me, and I couldn't quite get behind his story. And like they spent a lot of time in the movie at the start of the movie trying to set him up, trying to kind of like set up his flaws and this and the other. And I was just like, okay, for me, it just felt like we were wasting too much time at the start of the movie trying to like set things up and try to like make things empathetic and try to like establish things that he has to lose, like the pregnant girlfriend and stuff like that, when it could have been done a little bit more concise. I will say, like, some of the action, some of the kind of like, him trying to like outsmart the villain was pretty satisfying, pretty clever. But overall, I don't know, man. I just didn't like. I had like an okay time with this movie, but it definitely wasn't one that I would like play again or even recommend. Even though it's really weird because this is getting like, from what I've seen, it's getting quite high praise, and I'm just like, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I guess, but I don't know, I don't completely get it.
I took this movie for what it was because I think it was being advertised as a Christmas movie. Of course, it was set in like Christmas Eve. With Christmas movies, I think I don't want to make like a broad statement because I'm not too sure if what I'm saying is true, but my experiences for Christmas movies, they've always just been like all right. So I don't think there's been any that's memorable. Besides, of course, like Home Alone is one that's Home Alone and Grinch are like the two which are like mainly for like nostalgia, mainly. So those are like movies which is like that left the imprint on us when we were kids. So of course it's gonna leave a forever feeling of like nostalgia whenever we watch it again. So it's always going to be like, those are always going to be classic movies. So with this movie, I pretty much took it as a Christmas movie. So it was like, I wasn't really expecting much, even from the trailer. There wasn't really much like going off it. Like, I wasn't really excited to go watch it. But I wasn't like going to be disappointed that I was watching it. So for me, the movie was all right. I did like that it was, set in a high pressurizing environment, which is the airport. Which was in the airport, obviously, during Christmas Eve. So it kind of adds to that intense feeling and, suspense as well. So I did kind of like that they set it in that environment. It felt kind of, I wouldn't say unique, but it felt refreshing in a way. It felt refreshing. But overall, there was nothing memorable about this. It felt just like another Netflix film, you just add to the catalog. I don't think there was anything stand out. I did actually kind of like the antagonist because I think his character, him as an actor, did fit well with the character because I'm familiar with his work in Ozark. Obviously, I loved Ozark, so he had that kind of mellow, smart, witty, sinister-ish feeling and tone about him. So I think for me, him as the antagonist was really good. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about this movie besides it was an all right film. There wasn't really anything standout-ish. The story was cool. I felt like there were some things which were like realistic, but of course there was a lot of things which were completely outrageous. But like, look, I don't really have much to say besides this movie was all right. It was all right. I think it was a cool little Christmas movie to watch. I wouldn't say you should watch it on Christmas Day. Hell no, I wouldn't say it's definitely not that monumental for you to be watching it on Christmas Day. But it was okay. It was just like another Netflix movie that you watch when there's nothing else to watch. So for you guys, so you've kind of spoken about the plot a bit. So let's kind of get more into it. Do you think what about the plot did you like, and what about the plot did you disagree with? And do you think that this is a film that is going to be known, like it's going to be spoken about in terms of like its storytelling and the plot, or is it mainly going to be something that's going to be known for like individual performances, or it could be something else?
I think this movie will mostly be mentioned in terms of when people talk about how awful Netflix movies are, people will mention this one as the counter argument because it's not that bad. I think that's pretty much what's going on.
Yeah, I can see that. But that's the thing. I have an issue with that though, because it's like I'm not too familiar with Netflix's history. But like streaming movies, I remember people talking about how streaming movies are going to take over. But now it seems like the streaming movies are just creating movies which are not that bad. So was that their intention? Like, what's the purpose of this movie? Was it just to create another movie which wasn't that bad and that, because you know what I'm saying? Like, what was the intentions for this film?
So Netflix's business model is making movies that you can watch while cooking dinner or folding laundry. That's their target audience for their movies. So movies that are pleasant to watch, not too challenging. You don't really need to be in the same room. You just need to check in on it every once in a while, right? And that is why a lot of these movies are so terrible. And that is why these movies have things like really stock characters and really blunt exposition where characters will just outright say out loud what they're doing and why they're doing it. Like this movie had, like in the beginning, when they're in the car driving to the airport, they're outright explaining each other's life stories to each other, which is the more clumsiest exposition I've seen in a long time. Thankfully, not the entire movie is like this, but like the first couple of minutes are really like the most basic storytelling you've ever seen. And that is by design by Netflix. There have been like leaks and reports and accounts from people who used to work there or who made movies for Netflix. They get essentially instructions to dumb down their movies so that people who are folding laundry are not overwhelmed.
Wow. That is crazy.
And that is why when a movie comes along that is not that bad, sticks out so much. Because the vast majority of these are really lowest common denominator. They essentially punish you for paying attention. Because you're supposed to be able to be entertained while you're not paying attention. And something that occurred to me is that there are shows I watch like this while I'm cooking dinner or whatever, right? But those are shows that I've seen 5 times and that I like, and where it's okay if I miss 5 minutes because I've seen the episode. But these are good shows that are on my rewatch list, and I don't need to pay attention to every minute of it because I've already seen it a bunch of times. TV reruns were much the same way, right? Or are the same way. Back when people watched broadcast TV, like there would be movies that you've seen a whole bunch of times because they're in the rerun rotation. And so you don't pay too much attention to it, but it's okay because when you first saw that movie, you did pay attention to it, and now it's like background noise, right? But here it seems like Netflix is skipping all the way to the end and it's just making stuff to keep in the background. Like this isn't even second monitor content, right? Like this is like goes a few steps beyond that. And if you actually care about movies and want to be awake while you're watching them, like that's like a slap in the face, right?
Part of it is that they have to constantly provide sort of fresh new material for people to watch as well, and to keep people subscribed to Netflix. And every time that they have like kind of like one of these things, they try and like plaster it at the front so that everyone sees. And I think like this is like one of like the most viewed Netflix like movies in like of the year or something like that, which is a little bit surprising for it being this movie. But like saying that, I don't think I've like paid attention to too many of the other Netflix originals.
That's a lot of laundry.
Yeah, and in terms of like them dumbing down the movie, to be fair, it kind of makes sense because it's a lot of people that are probably even like time point, don't have sort of too much time to maybe even like pop to the cinema or have like the freedom to pop to the cinema whenever they want. So it's just like something easy for them to watch whilst they are doing whatever, or like maybe have a spare evening and maybe just want to watch something that's like light and not too much hard work. So these movies have their place in streaming, but for someone that enjoys good storytelling, enjoys compelling characters and stuff like that, it's definitely something that's not. I'm not the target audience for it, for sure.
And it's like one of the biggest creators of content, right? I don't know by the numbers if they're the biggest, but they're like Netflix is one of the biggest players, and if that is their attitude about that, then that's really concerning, right? It's not just that they make a few movies like this. It's their deliberate strategy, and they're changing movies or rejecting movies based on not fitting their template, right?
Yeah. What's interesting though is on the flip side, I believe they put more care and attention into the TV series that they're actually producing, because like Netflix have had so many big hits in terms of sort of TV series, and if anything, they're more kind of like synonymous for those, like things like Squid Game, things like Stranger Things and stuff like that, are really like big shows that have had like really good like cultural impact as well. So it's surprising that they don't try to apply some of that at least to a few of the movies that they are producing each year, where they have like kind of like the tempo ones where they do put more effort into trying to produce something that's a little bit more worthy of the movie title.
Yeah, and then something like this comes along, and it's actually like a real story, and like the characters are not like the worst, right? Like they are actually like have personalities, and there's a story going on. Even no matter how boilerplate it is, like there is a story here, right? And there are characters here, and there are performances here, right? So I think part of why, number one, I'm not usually subscribed to Netflix. I resubscribed to see this movie. And why I had a fairly positive reaction to it is because I was expecting complete trash, or at least something disposable that you kind of sit through. But they actually got a real movie out of it, at least I thought.
I mean, the whole like premise of it. I mean, we've talked about like kind of like ripping other like movies off and trying to like make something similar, or imitating other movies. And this is pretty much similar to like Pelham 1 to 3 or Phone Booth and stuff like that as well. Where it's like an interesting concept where you've got just like a protagonist that's their day's been completely flipped upside down just because of one unfortunate circumstance, and you have this whole like them being controlled by the antagonist, and you're like looking for how they're going to try and like weave their way out of it, and how they're going to like find their way from underneath the thumb of the antagonist, and on that level, like I think the movie got me on that level. It was like, okay, I'm invested in that aspect of it, in trying to see how it plays out. But in terms of like the premise, I was like very much on board with something like that aspect of it. I think the idea was something that hasn't been done in a while. I can't remember the last movie that was like similar to this. I don't know if you guys have an example, but it seems like it was like this type of movie hasn't been done in a while. It was kind of like refreshing to see something like this again being made.
And I don't think I've seen a movie where the character is a TSA agent, right? So that is something that is relatively new. Like the TSA didn't exist in the 90s, right? And it's also kind of high concept thriller that they used to make in the 80s, 90s, into the 2000s. And that has kind of fallen by the wayside. Like movies certainly don't advertise themselves as this is like the big what if, or like this is the scenario. Right? If you go into movies from the 90s, especially, like they were all like this, right? They weren't franchises for the most part. They were, here's the one sentence summary or pitch or scenario, and that's supposed to get your interest. And then there's also probably an actor in it you like, but they lead with the high concept. I think that makes it kind of unusual for movies in the 2020s.
I see what you're saying, but I'll be honest with you guys, there wasn't really much from this. Like the way that you guys are looking at this film, I don't see it. I don't know. Because you're saying in a while. If it was this year, then maybe not this year, but I'm sure
like 10 years.
I just can't think of it from the top of my head, but I'm sure there's been like Run, for example. Has anyone seen Run?
I have not seen that.
You should go and watch Run. I think that's another that's a thriller definitely, which it's definitely like a psychological drama as well, and it's definitely like a high stake thriller in a way too. So Run is definitely something which was, I don't know when it was released, it was a couple of years ago, but it was definitely within 10 years too. So for me, I don't think this is a film that I don't think it's different from any other movie that we've seen personally, especially a thriller that we've seen.
I think I'm thinking about one that we didn't watch this year that was on my list, but I never got a chance to go. What was the one where the serial killer takes his daughter to a concert and
Trap.
Trap, basically. I think maybe that's
That was
one
trash.
Did you watch it? You watched it? Okay, fair. But that was like one where it's like I had the concept of like the serial killer in a situation and he kind of like has to like figure his way out of it. So I don't think it's completely gone, but I don't think it's as like popular and or as common as what it was, so, back in the days.
They definitely still get made, but it used to be the norm that the scenario is what was supposed to get you attention, was supposed to get you interested, and now it's like the franchise and the name. And I think that is different, and so the movie is a little bit unusual in that sense, in that the scenario is what's supposed, like there are no big names in this. Like, I recognize like one or two actors, like Bateman obviously is the biggest name in this, but if he's the biggest name, then that says something about the rest of the cast, right? I do think that like the high concept stuff has fallen by the wayside, and for a movie to just do that is interesting, but it's not unique either, right?
And I hear what you're saying, and I do agree, and I kind of do. I will agree with you. I do kind of miss that when pretty much the story and, like you said, the high concept and and that dilemma is the gist of the film, the selling point of the movie. Jurors 2.
Yep, that's one.
The Jurors 2 is one as well. That's another one as well. So so I do agree actually, Daniel. So let me change what I said. I agree. You're right. I don't think there has been much of that lately, and it is refreshing when you actually the conflict is the selling point of the movie, and they should do more of that. And it's just sorry. This felt like a very eye-opening moment. I actually agree. Yeah.
And it's like it's not like nobody has done these in 10 years. It's more like they used to be the norm and now they're the sideshow, in the same way that in the 90s there were franchises and sequels, but they weren't the norm. Right? Whereas now if a movie is promoted, they promote it with, this is how you know this, right? It's either a sequel or it's an adaptation or something. That is in almost all cases how it's marketed primarily and how people think about it, right? Like it's just maybe this is just my pet peeve, but every time I see people talk about movies, it's just about like what else it's related to, as opposed to whether or not the story is interesting, and that then kind of leads into this whole idea of an unnecessary movie, or a movie that people haven't asked for, when really the question should be, does this offer an interesting story? To me, that's a symptom of people not being used to thinking in terms of the premise. Like, this is what the movie's about, but this is what it's a sequel to, or this is what it's connected to, or this is what it's adapting, or whatever. I do think that is a thing, and most Netflix movies are original movies, but they also tend to not lead with like a high concept, I don't think. Just something I noticed, and I thought it was interesting.
But the thing about this one was, I don't think that the concept in this was that interesting, even though they did lead with like the concept of the movie. For me personally, I don't think it was like interesting enough to get me excited or wanting to go and watch the movie, or engaged enough, because I've seen this before, like people trying to smuggle in dangerous things in the airport before. So that's the issue that I have with the film, was like it just wasn't really, it wasn't different. There wasn't anything about it. It was just another, terrorist trying to get,
I quite like the airport angle of it, because that's a scenario.
No, I like the airport angle. Don't get twisted. I like it was set in the airport. It's just the threat in terms of like the bomb. It was I've seen that all before. It could have been something different. You know what I'm saying? But sorry, carry on.
I mean, yeah, like the bomb in that, sure, it's like whatever, but it's the idea of like trying to smuggle something as dangerous as that through an airport where, again, since 9/11, airport security has been upped to the max, and they're doing constant checks and this and the other, and then the antagonist in this has kind of like thought of a way to get one of the TSA agents kind of like on board and blackmail a few people to kind of like do his bidding, essentially, and have that level of control of them to a point where he believes it should be a routine operation. This person checks it, clears the bag, and then they kind of like board the flight, and everything should be kind of like rosy on there. Again, I don't know how in real life how things are flagged, whether if something like that is flagged, it's reported to like other systems and this and the other. I don't know the realism of it, but the idea of it is pretty straightforward. And then of course, as the movie kind of unfolds, things kind of go a little bit awry and things doesn't go to plan, and it's like what happens then after that is pretty much the movie. But the whole like airport aspect of it just added a level of thrill, because again, this is meant to be like one of the tightest. Obviously, you have like president security and this and the other, but in terms of like a regular person, this is like kind of like the most secure place, or the place you're meant to feel like nothing can get through, essentially.
It's also a very structured and locked down environment, right? And they try to have this theme of control and being control of your life versus being controlled by other people and stuff like that. But I think if you really want to make a movie like this work, you really need somebody like Christopher Nolan or somebody like that. Like somebody who is extremely technically minded and very detail oriented, and really like spends like 2 years mapping out, okay, this is how airports work, and this is logistics of the plot, and this is where the bomb needs to go, and these are the different people that need to be bribed or tricked or something, and then that kind of unfolds like a clockwork or something like that. Right. And this movie goes into that arena a little bit, but it's not smart enough or dedicated enough to actually make that work, I don't think. Because like what you mentioned, like surely it's not just one guy looking at a screen, right? Like surely there's some form of automation or second or checks and balances or whatever. And I did not believe that this is like how it would happen. And if it's not how it would happen, then why are we going through all these elaborate steps and jumping through all of these hoops? Right? Are we not just like setting up like a prop just so we can knock it down, but it's not a real puzzle and it's not a real challenge?
What was even more frustrating and what kind of like took away from the realism of it as well is that, again, you're meant to take the airport situation seriously, but then you have people just like killing people in an airport or willy-nilly, especially like the bad guy. Like, yeah, he made it look like that security guard had a heart attack, but you've literally bumped into him just before he's gone down, essentially. So like people, like one check of the cameras, people are going to see that, people are going to see your face, and people are going to see like the moment before he died, you kind of like bumped into him and then something happened. And then to make it even worse, towards the end of the movie, like his like second guy that he had in the van, just like outright stabbing someone in the airport. It's just like, okay, how serious are we meant to take the airport concept of what's going on? And someone pulling up outside of the airport with a sniper rifle to shoot his girlfriend, versus like this premise of like, this airport's meant to be like really tight security and nothing's meant to get through. So things like that really kind of like annoyed me and like took me out of the idea that they were trying to sell here.
Yeah, and that is why I think this, like, if you're going to make this work, you really have to make it work. You really have to think through the scenario and all the different factors that all have to work. You have to justify each step of it, and if you do that, then there's real tension. Like this whole thing about a van can just stand in parking for an hour at the airport and nobody checks on it. Like, never mind that there's a sniper rifle poking out the side. Okay, like, I don't know, maybe that's small, whatever. But just the fact that it stands there for more than a minute and nobody notices, I think that is the kind of thing that wouldn't happen at a major airport like Los Angeles.
Honestly, and it adds to the film having like a predictable storyline, because it had a predictable outcome as well as having a predictable storyline. So it was like, there wasn't anything new, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary, there wasn't anything like that taught me anything new about working at a freaking airport, or in terms of like the character's role. It is annoying. I just wanted a bit, like I said, I wanted a bit more. It felt very unrealistic. But a question as well: do you think the antagonist threat, do you think it could have been high enough? And what I mean by that, like, do you think there could have been a scene where something actually did happen to the girlfriend? Like, make it more interesting. Like, was it engaging enough for you? Was it exciting enough for you?
They're not going to kill the girlfriend, right?
Not kill her, but just, sorry.
But because we know she's going to be fine, there's no actual tension, right? We know that they're going to be reunited in the end, right? So you have to kind of derive your tension from something else. Or you have to be so good that we forget that there are no real stakes, right? That's the other option. And I don't think it really does that either. Like, I think one of the things that really works and it really holds this movie together is Jason Bateman's performance as the Traveler. Because his voice in Ethan's ear makes the movie for me, right? Yes. Like their dialogue and they are back and forth, and Ethan's attempts to outsmart or intimidate him, and the Traveler always has an answer and always has a plan. But in a way, like at least in the beginning, in a way that was, I thought, believable, like in the sense of, I believe that he would have thought of that right? Or he would have anticipated that and he has a plan for it or something like that. When you dig into the details, then maybe this, like, it starts to unravel fairly quickly. But just in terms of their interaction with Traveler's voice in Ethan's ear, I thought that really worked, and that was probably the main reason why I actually enjoyed most of it. That's then a problem when about 2/3 of the movie that stops and it turns into a chase movie.
I agree. I think that was definitely like the selling point of the film, because obviously it's similar with like Phone Booth, and that's the selling point of Phone Booth as well. So do you think that should have been longer? It should have been like that interaction there should have been longer until it builds to the point where they do actually meet. But if they did do that, then couldn't you argue and say that's like any other film? Like, obviously, because in Phone Booth, I forgot how it ended, but did he end up meeting the antagonist?
I don't remember. But I think what you need to do here is you need to come up with something, some kind of escalation. And like from a thematic standpoint, this entire thing is about Ethan not being in charge of his life, right? He lives life on like other people's terms. He's pretty much there to support Nora, and he has a job where he performs routine tasks that execute other people's rules. And then he gets into a situation where the Traveler tells him what to do. So his entire thing, and there's even a line where it gets really obvious and really in your face, where the Traveler says something like, "Stop trying to outsmart me. You'll never be in control." Right? Mm-hmm. And if you set it up like that, then you have to structure it in a way where the big payoff at the end is where Ethan does take control. And he kind of does, in that he becomes an action protagonist and he goes rogue and he starts like going outside the rules. But I didn't find it very satisfying, because ultimately it felt like, okay, we had a premise for the first half of the movie, and that was kind of compelling and kind of suspenseful. But then it just turns into an action movie in the second half, like a generic one, with lots of running around and lots of gunfights and trying to make it to a particular place fast enough and stuff like that. And that's kind of where like the movie wasn't smart enough. Like, that's where the movie had to be smart. It had to present me with a scenario in which I believed that Ethan could outsmart the Traveler. And I think you could have done that by doing like there's like one of the cool things in this was where he swipes the supervisor's tablet, whatever, right, and puts the guy with the bomb on the search list. And he does it in a way that his boss doesn't notice and that the Traveler doesn't notice, because he knows where the security cameras are, and the Traveler only sees things that the security cameras see, and that is how he kind of outsmarts them. But he doesn't think it through, and then like it escalates and goes off the rails from there. But the Traveler is still too experienced and too powerful to actually be caught by this, right? Because now the thing Ethan didn't anticipate is that they can still set off the bomb just in the airport and kill 20 times as many people, right? So the movie really needed some kind of conclusion where I felt it was earned and satisfying, and they didn't really. They just, and the worst part of that is the hermetically sealed locker, where one of the most deadliest and infectious nerve agents in the world is kind of just contained by it, and it just like an airplane just happens to have that in its cargo hold at exactly the right place, and Ethan knows exactly how to handle it, like how to handle the nerve agent and how to utilize this locker, and that resolves the entire plot. And after that, everything is fine. There's no consequence, there's no complications, there's no nothing. And I think that is really where it really falls apart. Like, I can excuse all of the plot holes and inaccuracies of how the TSA works, how airports work, if you gave me a way to convince me that this is earned on Ethan's part. And I think that is really where it falls apart.
I agree with what you're saying, Daniel. And I think for me, why I enjoyed the antagonist threat was like his omniscient and omnipotent type of presence, where he could like cause damage from afar, and he knew like his own sex, obviously, because he had people working with him where they were seeing I forgot his name, but the main character, whenever I remember the scene where he was like messaging from under his phone, they caught him and obviously they told him, and then he was like it just felt like he was a god in a way. He felt like he just knew his at his every step. So having that omniscient and omnipotent presence was definitely for me one of the things that I liked about the antagonist. When they kind of met, I think their meeting was too soon. They should have kept that whole dynamic where the interaction through the phone. I think that should have been done way longer. I think it did kind of like collapse for me personally when they came into contact, because then that's when it got a bit ridiculous. That's when they had to start adding in the action, and the action in the airport is pretty much ridiculous because the airport is very strict. So any like commotion or like everything's pretty much caught on camera. And like you said, you mentioned the whole van being outside for like an hour. That doesn't happen. Like, you know what I'm saying? That there's always going to be someone there with a ticket. You know what I'm saying? There's going to be someone with a ticket that will tell you to have a move, or you know what I'm saying? So yeah, it kind of got a bit, it got ridiculous once, the protagonist and the antagonist met. I think they should have just kept, the relationship just should have been kept apart the way that it was in the beginning. It should have been throughout. But I do understand how that could have turned it, because I think if they did do that, then that would have been a film which wouldn't have been like, a dumb film for obviously the audience, where like Daniel says, the audience that are, cleaning their clothes, doing their washing and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think they should have kept it like that for like the majority of the film, like at least Act 1 and Act 2, definitely.
And I think they needed a plan for that second half, right? Where they said, okay, it's one kind of movie while they're talking through the earpiece. And then halfway through or something, the rules change and now they're interacting in person and are trying to outsmart and outmaneuver each other. But in order to do that, you have to think it through. You can't just cobble something together like the entire second half needed to be the point. So I was kind of reminded of Parasite, that Korean movie, where at exactly the halfway point, they changed the rules and it turns into a very different kind of movie. But that switch is the point of the movie, right? That is, the entire movie is built around executing that switch. And it's very jarring, and because it's so jarring, it's so effective. Because you think you're watching one kind of movie, and then they pull the rug out from you, and now you're in a different movie, and you have to catch up with the movie. And I think that is what they needed to do here. And instead, they just cobbled together some 2000s era action movie cliches that kind of end up with the villain dead and everything is fine. And that is just really unsatisfying. And if they're going to do this, they had to really have a plan for what is the second half about and how does it contrast with the first half. And they didn't do that. They just had stuff happen until the movie was over.
Question, was there anything that surprised you?
I really like Jason Bateman in this. Like, I know him mostly from Arrested Development. He's usually the straight man in comedies, and him being like a fairly sinister villain type of character, I thought that worked great. And I think a movie needs to impress you, even in small ways, to really get your attention, right? And for me, that was it, right? Where like that guy really like acted circles around everybody else in the cast, and he plays very much against what you usually know him as. And that to me was compelling. That to me kind of caught my interest and said, okay, like somebody had an idea here. And I'm curious what it is. Sadly, that's pretty much the only one in the entire movie, more or less. But that was the part where I said, oh, this is not just filler. Like there's something else going on here.
Yeah, I don't think I've got any surprises in this movie. Again, everything kind of unfolded as expected. I don't think I'm as high on Jason Bateman as you guys were in this. It for me, it just didn't. I like a villain, and he just wasn't compelling enough for me. And I think as well, it's Jonathan, you was right. It's the moment that they met, and they met too early in the movie, and they were having to do some of the conversations in person and some of the fights and stuff. That's when it started to like not jive for me at all. To know him as the antagonist, but apart from that, no real surprise in this movie. It's pretty much as you'd expect for most of it.
What about the reveal of who's behind the plot? So it turns out that the target of the plot is a senator who's traveling to Washington to give testimony or be part of a vote or something in order to increase weapons funding. And they picked Novichok, this nerve agent, because in order to implicate Russia, right? Because that's like part of Russia's MO. And by killing that senator, like the whole thing is basically, one thing I wasn't entirely clear on is how complicit the senator was, or if this was somebody on her team was willing to sacrifice her for the greater good. By her dying in this very visible and very tragic way, right? That would have created the political capital for her bill to be passed, because she doesn't have, it's said before, that she doesn't have the votes to pass it at the moment. But the idea would be that if this plan succeeds, that's how she would get that majority, right? It's kind of implied that it's like the weapons manufacturers that are behind this because they stand to gain like big contracts and whatever if this passes.
I think what was smart was the weapon that they were using, because I think it was designed by Russians, right?
This is a real thing. This has been used by Russia in the past to kill lots of people, because once it's released, it's basically impossible to defend yourself against it, which makes the finale where he just closes the door, this glass locker, and it's perfectly contained. That's the exact opposite of what would happen.
Yeah.
But the idea is basically that once you release this thing, like everybody in the remote vicinity will die at a horrible death.
I think that's all right. I think they were smart to make, to use a Russian weapon as the thing that kind of takes out, to pretty much make, turn the senator or whatever into a martyr while using a Russian weapon. I think that was smart.
But it's like another case where they kind of set themselves up for failure because it's not that smart a movie, right? It doesn't actually say anything about anything. It doesn't like refer to real world events or like events of the recent years. Like this is happening in a context where there is real like sabotage and stuff like that happening mostly in Europe, but I think some of it in the US too. And in that context, you're creating the story where there's a false flag operation implicating Russia just for profit reasons, right? So you should at least acknowledge that. Like, I think if this was a smart movie, and I think this doesn't want to be that kind of movie, but at the same time it sets itself up to be that kind of movie, right? Because it's like wading into this topic, and this is not like 2000 where like Russia is kind of the go-to villain, but it's not related to what's immediately happening in the world at the moment. You know what I mean? It is not quite as abstract as it would have been 10 or 20 years ago, where they were kind of like Russia has always been kind of the safe villain that you can kind of vilify without anybody complaining. And like this is kind of going to that well, but they don't seem to have realized that there's actually stuff in that area actually going on. Calling it tone deaf is maybe too much or too not quite to the point. But it's like they try to be smart, but then they aren't smart enough to realize how not smart they are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is kind of the same thing with constructing this very technical plot about the logistics and constraints of the airport and airport security, and hinging the entire plot on it. But then, but because they don't understand these things and don't want to understand these things, they then have to hand wave all of it and just make stuff up. But you've kind of created the expectation in the audience that this is what the movie's going to be about. But then it's not because they can't handle it. I don't know. Like it's really weird.
Nah, I agree. I just don't think they really want to go into that much, obviously, research and just that much work into it. Like you said, it just wants to make it like it's very simplistic. So it was simplistic. There were times where it could have been a bit complex and interesting, but it's a Netflix movie and we already know who their target audience is. So I don't.
But then it could just have been some drugs in a suitcase.
True.
Right? Like they didn't have to be this.
I think the movie spends enough time as well, because we don't get the reveal pretty much until the third act, when everything's kind of going a little bit crazy. And I don't think the movie does enough to even like weave any type of storyline related to sort of the kind of like the Russian nerve gas into sort of the rest of the story and what's kind of like unfolding in the rest of the movie, it seems. So for me, when you were kind of like initially asking me, I was like, it really could have been anything. Like they could have like plug and placed it with anything, and it wouldn't have really like mattered for the movie itself and like how things like kind of unfolded, because I don't think it has much impact on any of the characters at all in this sort of particular movie. But obviously it has like the real world implications, and it has like, again, like you mentioned about like sabotage and interfering and this and the other, and like manipulation tactics, and obviously like what do you believe in like the media and like how things are reported and stuff like that. There's like loads of angles that it could have potentially gone down, but essentially it doesn't choose to do any of that at all. It's just an agent. It's just like an agent, or like the vehicle of what they want it to be in the suitcase, essentially, and kind of like nothing more than that, unless it was a victim being dumbed down.
They do need to be the thing in the suitcase, something that can kill a lot of people. So in that sense, just it being drugs wouldn't have done it. But you could have done something else, I'm sure. One thing that's kind of interesting about this is that the audience reaction to this. So the critics seem to broadly like it. They're not raving about it, but it's broadly positive. At this point, 88% is positive by critics on Rotten Tomatoes. And it's significantly worse for audiences, right? And when I kind of waded into Reddit a little bit to see what people were saying about this, like everybody hated it, and everybody was latching on to like the contradictions and the plot holes and the little details that are just not how this works. Normally when this happens, it's something like really artsy or like Oscar bait or something like that, right? Where if the critics love it, but the audience hates it, that's usually what happens. And this is like a pretty okay Netflix movie with a plot out of the 2000s, right? Like terrorist threat and bomb in a suitcase and whatever. Why do critics like this and audiences dislike it? Like kind of should be the other way around, right?
You would think so, and I think what you might find in sort of these type of movies is that the critics go in with set expectations in terms of like knowing it's just a Netflix movie, and are probably like less critical of it compared to if it was like maybe something that was like had a theatrical release. Like you mentioned, it kind of ticks and like enough of like some of the basic boxes for you to be like, okay, like, you know, is it a good or bad movie? And for the most part, like the Rotten Tomato scores is, you know, I think they're kind of like rating it, is it good or bad? And for the most part, I can see like why the critics wouldn't be sort of too harsh on a movie like this. And at the same time, as someone that's in like the audience, it's almost like at certain times kind of like insulting our intelligence a little bit, or insulting sort of, you know, in terms of like how airports work and what's like kind of like to be believed and what's not.
I think it definitely is to do with expectation as well, and it's to do with time as well. Like obviously the time that this movie is set as a Christmas movie, and as my point before was, I don't think Christmas movies have been regarded like, I don't know if there's been any Christmas movie that's been regarded like as one of the best movies of all times besides like, you know, Home Alone and The Grinch. I think just Christmas movies are just, you know, these movies are just for its time. So like I said, I don't think it's been regarded. I don't think Christmas movies in general are regarded as classical movies. So I think they took that into consideration as well. And I just don't think they have the same energy that they would have for, like I would say before, a theatrical release type of film. Or do you know what I'm saying? So I think this movie reached their standard, and their standard for this was probably low. Because I find it very hard to believe that, you know, film critics would regard this movie as a great film in comparison to other great movies, like with like, you know, like other movies which are actually considered as great, like, you know, like other, you know, just great movies in general. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think this is a good movie for the time that it's set, as in like, you know, it's a Christmas movie. So for a Christmas movie, I think they're seeing it as it's a good Christmas movie.
And I think if it's your job to watch the Netflix movie of the week, this is probably a pleasant surprise. Or maybe it reminds you of better movies that you used to watch 20 years ago.
Mm.
It's also possible. But like on paper, like this should be something that audiences should like quite a bit more, right? Because it's got action, it's got a little bit of emotion. You know, it's got some actors you've maybe seen. That's just something that kind of falls outside the norm.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask, how does this compare to other Christmas movies that you guys have seen? But
I'm not even sure it's a Christmas movie, right? Like there's a couple of lines about how he doesn't like Christmas because it's kind of like reminding you of your inadequacies, and that's kind of it. Like that's the extent to which this is about Christmas. And and like it's like travel on Christmas Day is busy. That's the other aspect of it.
And people say Merry Christmas throughout the movie, so.
Yeah, one of the TSA guys wears a Santa hat. Yeah, no, but like, is this really a Christmas movie? Like, it's set during Christmas. Christmas is referenced.
It's kind of advertised like a Christmas movie, though.
A little bit, yeah.
I was very shocked actually, because when I was like putting the movie on, so I didn't know it was like regarded as one initially. So when I was like looking for it on Netflix and it was under the Christmas movie section, I was like, oh, okay. So then immediately I thought, okay, maybe this is like Die Hard, and I haven't seen Die Hard. But I was like, okay, maybe it's like trying to go for that similar type of vibe, but again, it didn't have any sort of resonance to Christmas at all.
I don't think it's important to it. Like I wouldn't file it under that. It's window dressing at best, right?
I think it's time for last thoughts.
Good idea, but not executed all that well. Again, like Daniel mentioned, it just kind of like reminded me of better movies that I'd seen in the past of sort of a similar genre. But nothing too offensive about this one either. It's one that I'll forget in a couple of weeks that I even watched type of movie. So on that one, I'll give it 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this has probably been a review. I don't know. I'd say that there wasn't really much to say about this movie. It's pretty much predictable. A predictable storyline and a predictable outcome. So yeah, for that, I'd give it a I'd say 5 out of 10 as well. Yeah, 5 out of 10. I think it's just an average film, goodish average film.
So I think there's a core here to like, which is the interaction between Ethan and the traveler, but it writes a check it can't cash, right? Because the at least especially the second half of the plot hinges on a lot of details that are simply phoned in, and where the movie couldn't be bothered to get them right or to make them convincing. And so the entire thing just kind of descends into like cliches that you have to kind of ignore in order to enjoy the movie, which is not a good place. Grading on a curve for Netflix movies, this is pretty good, simply because of Bateman, right? But overall, it's nothing to be excited about. So give it a 10 100 out of 5.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in today's episode.
Let us know your thoughts down below in the comment section. What did you think about the movie? Did you enjoy this with your family over Christmas, or is this one that you didn't like too much? Let us know your thoughts down below. And of course, if you enjoyed our discussion, tell a friend. And if you hated everything that we discussed here and thought we were a bunch of idiots, tell an enemy. We are the I Just Don't podcast.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in today. We will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.